You're in the Taunton area making a film, I believe, The Bellstone Fox?
Yes, that's what it's called. It's based on a book by David Rook, who unfortunately was killed a couple of years ago in a motor car accident. And the film is based on, or it has a background of hunting. So we've come to one of the famous hunting spots of the country to make it. It isn't, I hasten to add, either a pro-hunting or an anti-hunting. It just happens to have a background of hunting.
You ride yourself in this?
That is, if I may coin a phrase, a sore point. In fact, several sore points. When they came to me and asked me if I wanted to play this part, I read the script and I liked the story so much because it's a family story. It's a story that could appeal to all members of the family on several levels. I noted that the part was that of a huntsman, which I'm sure most of your listeners, being probably local, will know that it's not just a man who hunts, but the professional huntsman who leads the pack and has to be, perforce, an excellent rider. I think my experience of riding before this was confined to sitting on a rather sleepy horse in a BBC television studio and careering down a 45-degree slope on a not-so-sleepy horse in the film of Antony and Cleopatra. Fortunately, there were about 40 other horses involved, so he knew when to stop, because I certainly didn't. So obviously I had to do some preparation, and I went away to a riding school for a couple of weeks. I know that sounds a bit offhand and casual, but a couple of weeks was all the warning I had. So I got in as much riding as I could without actually breaking every bone in my body or rubbing every patch of skin raw. And then came down here 2 weeks previous to our commencement of shooting and had further meetings with horses, hounds, foxes, and went through a whole program of learning how to crack a whip, how to blow a horn, how to control the hounds, and indeed how not to call them dogs, because every time I call them dogs I get sat on. But all in all, it's been one of the most exciting and interesting periods of my life as an actor, because it's a world that I was totally unused to, totally ignorant of. And the whole thing has been really a very rich and rewarding experience. And I must say, so far, we've completed 3 weeks of quite arduous work, really. I mean, I get up at 6:30 in the morning, which may sound chicken feed to some people, but we have to be ready, dressed to go at 8 o'clock. This means makeup, costume, and getting to the location, which may be anywhere from sort of somewhere near Bridgewater to right over the other side to Stigumber or right on the top of Triscombe Stone. Then we shall be sort of galloping madly across gorse or bracken or through fields. And then we'll have to stop and go back and do it again at least 15 times. And then we sort of stop and split it all up into little bits and go into close-ups and reaction shots and all this, which is very, very boring, actually. We've got a number of local riders with us who've been very helpful and cooperative. But I think even the glamour, or the so-called glamour that they thought they were going to encounter in the film business, I think that's begun to wear a bit thin, too.
We talked about your filming now here in Somerset, but of course before instant television fame was Soames in the Forsyte Saga, you were recognised as a giant in the theatre.
That's very kind of you to say so. I played some giant parts, and I suppose... Well, I always feel that Shakespeare is the ultimate in acting, insofar that if you can do Shakespeare, you can do pretty well anything. At least you confront so many challenges in Shakespeare, both vocally and physically, that anything that comes after that must relate to, or at least be less than that. I'm not saying that there aren't certain parts. Well, for instance, this one, with its riding and its sort of know-how on a professional level, is obviously, again, a challenge. But for pure acting, I think Shakespeare brings out the total effort in an actor. And for me, the world that I lived in before, as you say, instant television, when was a very rich and rewarding one, and I was lucky enough to be fairly successful in it.
Of your many giant performances, is there one which you really enjoy, which sticks out?
There's certainly one that sticks out. I can't say that I enjoy it, because it's not the kind of part that you can enjoy, not in the simple meaning of the word. King Lear, I suppose, is the mountain of all mountains to climb for any actor. And I certainly have a love-hate relationship with this part. I played it first when I was 27. Shall I say locally, at the Bristol Old Vic?
Oh, yeah.
This was during the season I spent there, and was an interesting first essay. I had originally been in the King Lear that Donald Wolfe had played. And it's an interesting thing. I always like to feel that there's a complete link between modern actors and, well, shall we say Shakespeare? Because when you think that my Lear must be, obviously, heavily influenced by the Lear that I worked with in the terms of Donald Wolfe. He played, in his turn, Kent to Randall Ayrton's Lear. Now, Randall Ayrton, obviously, when he played Lear, was influenced by another, probably even played in another production of Lear earlier on, and so on and so forth back. And so one gets a terribly strong feeling of tradition and connection between, say, Richard Burbage, who probably played Lear for Shakespeare, right up to the modern day.
You just said that once you played Shakespeare, you can do anything.
That was one of my usual generalizations, which was sweeping, but if you want me to particularize on anything, I'll try.
I believe you've been a dame in pantomime.
Yes. I've also played a woman's part in Shakespeare, too, because in Merry Wives of Windsor, at the age of 16, I had to play one of the two boys who come on at the end dressed as girls in order to confuse the story even further, and God knows that story is confusing enough. Yes, I played the dame at Bristol Old Vic. And I must say, I was thinking about it the other day, if you try to get that cast together now, I think it would run into sort of several £1,000s. Because I was playing the dame, Alan Doby was playing the cat, Alderman Fitzwarren was Derek Godfrey, one of the sailors on the ship was Peter O'Toole, Robert, oh God, names, I can never remember names, but he's at the National now, used to be at the Bristol Old Vic. Oh, he'll never forgive me if he hears this, but still. He also, who is now a leading player at the National Theatre, he was playing, I think, well, he was a student at that time, actually. I was thinking, and also Maurice Shearer, once, when one of the dancers in the mermaid sequence in the underwater bit was ill through treading on a tin tack on the stage or something, she came on and we had this marvellous experience of having one of the first dancers of the country, who was then a member of the company as an actress, showing her paces as a dancer. Of course, she stood out like a shining spark.
Listening to you now, it's difficult to believe that in fact you were born in Shepherd's Bush and at one time you had a Cockney accent.
Yes, but I may say that for this film I am trying, if you'll pardon the expression, to assume a Somerset accent. I may occasionally move a little bit farther west than that, but that's what I'm trying to do. But no, Cockney accent, yes, well, that was bullied out of me in the first 6 months. H's were sort of discovered from nowhere, and ow sounds. This is always the most difficult sound for anybody, I think, to accomplish when you're trying to speak a standard English. Because I always feel that some of those terribly far back people have just as bad an accent as any 4-bar-2 Cockney. These are just as unpleasant to listen to because, again, the vowels are tortured, the consonants are twisted and fractured, and it's all just as bad English as the usual acknowledged bad English of the metropolitan areas. I think the worst accents to listen to in terms of ugliness are Birmingham and Liverpool because they are nasal. Newcastle not so bad because it has a life and a variety and a dialect, which is fine. Cockney, of course, has its perkiness and its humour. But accent as such, of course, is not something that should be eradicated. I would like to hang on to our accents. Everybody doesn't have to speak standard English. They're not actors. We, as actors, have to set a certain level of speech, especially for classical plays like Shakespeare. Because if you're going to speak English, you know, an A is an A is an A, and O is an O is an O, and that's it, you know. You can't change that.
Well, during your career, as I said, you've had many giant parts, but I should think none more difficult, trying, and possibly humorous than the one you did in the Morecambe and Wise show.
Ah, well, now that wasn't a performance, that was a tonic for me, because to work with Eric and Ernie is not only a privilege, but also a great experience. I entered it with a certain amount of fear and trepidation, because although I have sung and I have danced on stage before, notably in salad days at the Bristol Oak Vic, this was doing something in front of millions of people with two very, very professional artists who could hold an audience in the palm of their hands, do anything they like with. For me, I was so grateful to get through it without actually blotting the copybook completely, that when I came eventually to see a recording of it, I thought, well, you know, at least I held my end up. But, as I say, to be with them alone is a tonic. In fact, I'll tell you something, the rehearsals actually are much funnier than the show.
Oh, I'd love to be at one. I really would to see that.
Eric is quite wicked. And in rehearsal, he will, as it were, try out an ad lib on a line. Fine. So we all fall about, laugh, and then get on with the rehearsal. And he'll try another one and another one. And then the next day, when you're rehearsing, on that very same line, he'll try something different. And again, we all fall about. And this goes on for the whole time that you're rehearsing, say about 10 days. You then get to the performance. And although you're not quite sure which one he's going to come out with, you have actually heard most of them, as it were, before, at some time or the other, so they don't come as entirely a surprise. They're not entirely ad-libbed on the night. Except, of course, when something goes wrong. And then he slips in the odd line, and you've got to keep your face straight. And this is something that, in watching the Morecambe and Wise show, which, of course, I'm one of the greatest fans of, you see guest artists corpsing, as we call it, you know, really collapsing with laughter or biting their lips or chewing the inside of their cheeks in order to try and stop themselves laughing. And I swore that when I went on that, you know, I would not go, as they say. I nearly went when, unfortunately, the drummer in the orchestra kicked his drum kit over backstage, and Eric turned to me in the dressing room scene. I don't know whether this was in the Christmas show or the other one. I think it was yes, it was the first show I did with him, because I've done two with him, actually. So Eric turned to me and said, do you realize your theatre's falling about your ears? Which I think was pretty snappy, and of course nearly took me off guard. And I did all in my power to control myself, and of course an actor has to use every atom of control on the stage, and I've worked with some actors, very, very well-known actors, who are absolutely useless at keeping their faces straight. I won't name them, I won't say who they are, but even in a very, very straight, tragic Shakespearean play, I have had trouble with some actors who just giggle. And for instance, when a play has a long run, you really do have to go back to technique, because you cannot go on saying the same thing night after night in the same situation and expect it to be absolutely fresh. This is, if you'll pardon the expression, an amateur way of doing it, which is that you wait for the inspiration. You can't wait for inspiration. You have to give that audience their money's worth every night, and if you haven't got a technique whereby you can give that audience its money's worth, then you're not an actor.